Welcome back. In this lecture, we have something very exciting in store. We're going to be blowing up the drone. So we're going to add an explosion function to our drone pawn that we can call when we shoot the thing. And by the end of this lecture, we'll be blowing up that drone when we shoot it. Awesome stuff. So let's get started. Now we've added starter content. If I go to the starter content folder and I go to particles, we do have an explosion. I can double click to see this explosion, and this is a fine explosion, and you could use this if you like, but I would like to use an even cooler explosion that comes in one of the Paragon assets. Now, you don't have to follow along and download this Paragon asset. I know these are large asset packs, and you may have limited space on your machine. If that's the case, you can use this awesome explosion from the starter content. That's no problem. But if you want to upgrade to a better explosion like I'm doing, you can follow along and download this asset pack. So I'm going to go to the marketplace here in the Epic Games launcher, and I'm going to search for Twin Blast. And here is one of the Paragon assets called Twin Blast. Now you can see I already own it. Now you can download this, you can add it to your project. I'm going to add it to my project. So I'm going to click Add to Project, search for my first person shooter, make sure to select the correct one, of course, and I'm going to click the drop down and select 5.0 EA since that's the version I'm using. And I'm going to click Add to Project. Now this will take a minute, so I'll give it a second to load. All right, so once that's finished loading, I can close the Epic Games launcher and I can come back into my project where I see Paragon Twin Blast. All right, so now we have the Paragon Twin Blast asset pack. Now, I don't need to go over rearranging folders and deleting things. We already know how to do that. I'm going to move it into characters and click move here, and then fix up my redirectors in that extra folder there and hit delete. Now, sometimes the folder wants to stick around. Sometimes you're able to delete it after closing the editor and coming back. Moving large folders in Unreal Engine can be tricky sometimes. I'm going to leave it there for now. Now, in my characters folder with my new Paragon Twin Blast, I'm interested in the effects. Now, I leave it to you to delete the stuff that we don't need, but I'm interested in going into effects and particles, and I'm going to search in here for vortex, and I see this vortex grenade explosion. Now here is the explosion I'm interested in. This is quite a bit bigger than that one in the starter content, and that's the one I'm going to use, but feel free to use the one in the starter content if you like. So now we have an explosion, and we need some way to play that explosion on our drone pawn. So our drone pawn is going to need its own function for exploding. So let's go to our blueprints folder, go into drone, and open our drone pawn. And here on the drone pawn, we're going to create a new function. So here in the functions section, we're going to click the plus, and I'm going to call this function simply explode. And now we can place any logic here in the explode function. But when are we going to call this? Well, we want to call this when we shoot the drone. We'll deal with damage later, but for now, I'd like to just blow up the drone as soon as I shoot it for the first time. So that means I can go into my FPS character blueprint, and here in our firing logic, we're performing a line trace, and we're spawning an emitter at the location where our line trace hits. That's our hit particles for our bullet, but we want to do something if we hit the drone, and we can do that because we have the hit actor here in our hit result. So we can take this hit actor, which is in the form of an actor, not in the form of a drone pawn, but we can cast it. So we're going to take this hit actor, drag off, and type cast to drone pawn, and select that. Now we're casting the hit actor to a drone pawn. Now, when we're shooting, we're going to be hitting all sorts of actors, from static mesh actors in the world to whatever else we hit. That's why it's important to cast whatever we hit to a drone pawn. Now, each time we hit something like a static mesh in the world, this cast will fail, and we can simply do nothing in that case. But when the cast succeeds, that means we actually hit a drone pawn. And in that case, we want to do something. And what do we want to do? Well, we want to get that drone pawn that we hit and call the explode function. So we can type explode, and here we're calling the explode function on the drone pawn that we hit. So this is great. Now we can spawn the particles and play sounds in this explode function, which belongs to the drone pawn. Now, first we'll take care of the sound. We've already seen that we can use play sound 2D, but we want to play a sound at a location, which means it's louder or less loud depending on how close we are to it. So we can use play sound at location for that. So we're going to drag off of the pin and type play sound at location and use that. Now, our starter content does have some sounds in it. We can go back and take a look in the starter content and go to audio. And here are a few sounds that we have in the audio folder. Now we have explosions 1 and 2. Now these are just wave files. These are raw sound assets, but there's something called a sound cue. If we take a look at explosion_cue, double click that, this has its own blueprint. A sound cue has ways to manipulate sound. In fact, it's using a random node here with these two explosion waves that we saw and selecting one of these at random each time we play the cue. Now, if we click on output, we'll see that our sound cue has the option to have an attenuation. An attenuation is an asset that allows us to have a sound that's louder the closer we are to it. Now, if we click the drop down, we see that there are no attenuations to choose from, so we can create our own. So here in the audio folder, I'm going to right click, and here in the sounds section, we can select sound attenuation. And for this attenuation, I'm going to call it drone_ATT for drone attenuation. Now we can double click this, and we see that there are some parameters. We have an inner radius and a fall-off distance. If we're within 400 units from the inner radius, we'll hear the sound at its full volume. And if we're outside of the fall-off distance, we won't hear it at all. Let's increase this to about 8,000. And that way, we can hear sounds that are using this attenuation up to 8,000 units away. Looks like I put 80,000. I'm going to use 8,000. And anywhere between the inner radius and the fall-off distance, we'll hear that sound at varying volumes depending on how far we are. So let's save and close that attenuation. And for the explosion cue, let's select that drone attenuation and click Save. And now we have this explosion cue that we can use. So let's go back to drone pawn. And for play sound at location, we're going to choose explosion cue. And since we're using a sound cue that's using an attenuation, now we get that sound fall off. Now we want to play this at the location of the drone. So we can right click. Since we're inside the drone pawn blueprint, we can use functions that belong to this drone pawn, such as getActorLocation. We're going to use that vector and pass it in for the location for this sound. So now when we call explode, we'll play this explosion sound. Now we need to make sure that we're actually hitting the drone so that we can call this function. Now here in FPS character, in our line trace, we see that we're tracing against the visibility channel. Our drone mesh component needs to block the visibility channel for us to get that trace hit. So here in drone pawn, let's select drone mesh and scroll down to the collision settings. And here in collision, we see that the collision presets is set to no collision. We need to change this to custom so that we can change the collision settings. For one, we need collision enabled set to collision enabled query and physics. And then we can set this mesh to block the visibility channel. So we can check this box under trace responses for visibility, and now our mesh will block the visibility channel. Now, in order to block things, the mesh needs a collision hull. That's a basic form of geometry that the physics engine uses for collisions and trace hits. So we can make sure of that by scrolling up and browsing to our Bellica drone, opening that asset, and here in the skeletal mesh editor, we can go to show and select collision. And we see that there is the collision hull for our drone skeletal mesh. It looks like a capsule. This is the collision hull that Unreal Engine uses to detect trace hits and physics collisions. So we're good there. I'm going to close that. And now that our drone pawn is set to block the visibility channel, we can test this out by shooting it. So I'm going to go ahead and shoot. And I have the sound off for my recording software, so you can't hear it in this video, but you should hear it on your machine. Now, if I shoot to the side, it's just the gunshot sound, and when I shoot the drone, it's the explosion. So we have an explosion sound, but we need those particles. We need an explosion visual effect. So for your challenge, you're going to use that explode function that we created in DronePon and use spawn emitter at location, as we've done before, and choose the explosion particles that you want to use, whether they're the ones from the starter content, or if you downloaded the Twin Blast assets, use that vortex grenade explosion. We're going to want to spawn the emitter at the location of the drone, so use the drone's location. Pause the video and do this now. Okay, so I'm going to go back to DronePon, and here in the explode function, I'm going to use spawn emitter at location. So spawn emitter at location, and I'm going to select the explosion I want to use, which in my case is vortex, and it's this Twin Blast vortex grenade explode. Now I want to spawn this at the location of the drone, so I need this get actor location node. I'm going to copy that and plug it right in. And now I should see the explosion particles. Let's go ahead and compile and save this and hit play. And now if I shoot the drone, then I get the explosion, which is great. Now, before we wrap this up, I'd like to destroy the pawn as soon as we explode it, because it shouldn't be hanging around after we've blown it up. Now we can destroy an actor, and a pawn is of course an actor, with the destroy actor function. So we're going to use that. We're going to type destroy actor and call destroy actor after we've spawned and played the sound. So let's compile, hit play, and we'll shoot the drone, and poof, the drone is gone. All right, so we covered a lot of ground in this lecture. We are now exploding our enemy. We can blow it up when we shoot it, which is awesome. Now, we're not doing any damage and we're not getting any points for blowing up drones, and they certainly don't chase us or do anything threatening, so those things will be in the lectures to come. But we've come a long way, and we're now causing really fun explosions, which is awesome. So excellent job. I'll see you in the next lecture.